Life is a dream of which the ego is the projected shadow. Alan Watts, since the dawn of human consciousness, the search for understanding the self has been a never-ending journey. How many of us have asked ourselves, who am I really beyond the roles I play and the masks I wear? The illusion of self is a subtle veil, woven by the threads of identification and attachment. It's such an ingrained mental construct that most of us confuse it with our true essence. But what happens when that veil is temporarily lifted? What does the Zen state reveal to us about the ephemeral nature of the ego? Zen, in its ancient wisdom, invites us to a radical awakening. It is not a philosophy to be understood intellectually, but a direct experience of reality as it is. When we sit in Zazen, the practice of Zen meditation, what are we really doing? We are creating a space to observe the mind without judgment, to witness the ceaseless flow of thoughts, emotions, and sensations without identifying with them. In this state of pure presence, what do we discover? The illusion of self begins to dissolve. We realize that we are not our thoughts. We are not our emotions. We are not even our body. We are the consciousness that witnesses all of this. It's a profound and often disturbing revelation. The ego, that mental construct that we believe to be our true self, is exposed as a fabrication, a character in a cosmic play. But why do we hold on to this illusion so much? Why are we so afraid to let go of the reins of control and dive into the luminous void of the non-self? This question takes us to the heart of the human experience. From the moment we are born, we begin to build a narrative about who we are. Our name, our family, our experiences, it all becomes part of a story we tell ourselves and the world. It's as if we are constantly writing and rewriting a script, trying to make sense of the complexity of existence. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre captured this idea in his famous quote, "Man is condemned to be free. This freedom, paradoxically, can be terrifying. Without a fixed and unchanging self, we are thrown into an ocean of possibilities. Each moment becomes a choice, an ongoing creation of who we are. But what if this freedom, instead of being a burden, was actually the key to our liberation?" Zen invites us to explore this possibility. By releasing the bonds of identification with the ego, we discover a deeper and more authentic freedom. Imagine, for a moment, that you are sitting in a park, watching the leaves move in the wind. Normally, your mind would be occupied with thoughts about the past or future, worries about work or relationships. But for a brief moment, you can simply be present. Right now, who is the you are watching? It's not your name. It's not your memories or your future plans. It is a pure consciousness, devoid of labels or definitions. This is a glimpse of what Zen calls beginner's mind or no mind. It is a state of openness and receptivity, free from the limitations of the ego. In this state, reality is experienced directly, without the filters of our usual interpretations. Psychologist Carl Jung, in his exploration of the collective unconscious, reached similar conclusions. He proposed that beyond our individual psyche, there exists a deeper level of consciousness shared by all humanity. This idea resonates with the Zen understanding that our true nature transcends the boundaries of the individual ego. But how can we integrate this understanding into our everyday lives? How do we navigate the practical world with its demands and expectations while maintaining this expanded awareness? The answer lies in the constant practice of mindfulness. It's not just about sitting in meditation for a few hours a day, but about bringing this quality of presence into every moment of our lives. Imagine you are washing the dishes. Normally, this would be a mundane task, something to do quickly while your mind wanders. But what if you brought your full attention to this activity? Feel the temperature of the water, observe the soap bubbles, listen to the sound of the dishes. In this moment of total presence, where is the I? Where is the story you normally tell about yourself? This mindfulness practice allows us to create space between the stimulus and the response. Viktor Frankl, psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, emphasized the importance of this space. Between the stimulus and the response, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. As we cultivate this practice, we begin to notice patterns in our thoughts and behaviors. We see how the ego automatically reacts to certain situations, perpetuating cycles of suffering. But with this awareness comes the possibility of change. For example, you might notice how defensively you react when someone criticizes your work. Instead of completely identifying with this reaction, you can observe it with curiosity. Interesting. The ego is feeling threatened now. This simple observation creates a space for a more conscious and compassionate response. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus said, "No one enters the same river twice." This metaphor perfectly captures the transient nature of reality and self. Just as the river is constantly flowing, our experience and identity are constantly changing. Zen invites us to fully immerse ourselves in this flow without trying to cling to a fixed identity. But that dive can be scary. The ego, in its search for security and control, resists this dissolution. This is why many spiritual traditions speak of a dark night of the soul, or a period of confusion and disorientation that precedes spiritual awakening. Transpersonal psychologist Stanislav Grof describes this process as a spiritual emergency. It is a period in which old ego structures begin to disintegrate, making room for a new understanding of oneself and the world. This process can be challenging, but also incredibly freeing. During this phase, it is common to experience a sense of loss of identity. Beliefs and values that once seemed so solid begin to dissolve. There may be moments of intense fear or deep sadness, but there are also moments of ecstatic joy and a sense of connection to something greater than oneself. It is important to remember that this process is not linear. There is no end point where we can say, now I am completely free of the ego. Instead, it is a continuous dance between the relative and the absolute, between form and emptiness. Zen master Shunryu Suzuki captured this idea beautifully. You are perfect just as you are, and there is room for improvement. This apparent contradiction contains a profound truth. Our essential nature, beyond the ego, is complete and perfect. At the same time, on a relative level, there's always room for growth and refinement. This understanding frees us from the incessant search for perfection or fulfillment. There is nothing to achieve, no end state to reach. There is just this moment, exactly as it is. But how can we live from this understanding? How do we navigate the practical world, with its demands and expectations, while maintaining this expanded awareness? The answer lies in the practice of non-doing or wu-wei, a central concept in Taoism that also finds an echo in Zen. It is not about passivity or inaction, but about an action that flows naturally, without the effort of the ego. Imagine a large oak tree during a storm. Its branches are flexible, moving with the wind. He does not withstand the storm, nor does he try to control it. Simply allow it to pass. Likewise, we can learn to flow with life's circumstances, responding with flexibility and grace, without the rigidity of ego. In practice, this can manifest itself in several ways. At work, for example, instead of identifying completely with our roles and titles, we can approach them with lightness and curiosity. We carry out our tasks with full attention and dedication, but without the weight of the need to prove our worth or achieve a certain status. In relationships, this understanding allows us to be truly present with each other, without projections or expectations. We recognize that, just like us, the other is also an expression of this vast and unlimited consciousness. This makes room for a deeper, more authentic connection. Even in times of conflict or difficulty, we can bring this expanded awareness. Instead of reacting automatically from a wounded ego, we can create a space of observation. What is really going on here? What part of me is feeling threatened or challenged? This practice of self-inquiry is central to many spiritual traditions. The Indian sage Ramana Maharshi based his entire teaching on the simple question, "Who am I?" By continually returning to this question, we begin to peel back the layers of identification and touch something deeper and truer. It is important to note that this dissolution of the ego does not mean the loss of our individuality or the ability to function in the world. On the contrary, paradoxically, the less we identify with the ego, the more authentic and effective we become in our actions. Psychologist Abraham Maslow, in his studies of self-actualizing individuals, observed that these people had a remarkable ability to be fully present and engaged in the moment without being dominated by egoic concerns. They were able to respond to situations with spontaneity and creativity, free from the limitations of fear and the need for approval. This freedom manifests itself in subtle but profound ways in our everyday lives. You may notice that you become less reactive to criticism or praise. Or perhaps you notice a greater ability to appreciate the simple beauty of the present moment, the taste of a cup of tea, the sound of rain, the smile of a stranger on the street. As this understanding deepens, we begin to see the world in a different way. The boundaries between self and other, between internal and external, begin to dissolve. We realize that we are part of an intricate web of interrelationships, that our individual existence is inextricably linked to the entire cosmos. This view is echoed in both modern quantum physics and ancient mystical traditions. Physicist David Bohm spoke of an implicit order underlying apparent reality, a fundamental unity that transcends our ordinary perceptions of separateness. Likewise, the Buddhist concept of interdependence reminds us that nothing exists in isolation, that everything is in constant interaction and co-creation. Living from this understanding leads us to a natural ethic of compassion and care. If there is truly no other separate from me, then the well-being of all beings becomes as important as my own well-being. This is not an external moral imposition, but a natural expression of our true nature. Environmental activist John Seed expressed this idea beautifully. I am that part of the rainforest recently emerged in human form to protect itself. When we identify deeply with all life, our action in the world becomes a natural expression of that connection. But it is important to remember that this achievement is not an end state to be reached. It is a continuous process of waking up and forgetting, remembering and falling back asleep. The ego has a powerful tendency to reassert itself, to reclaim its territory. This is why continuous practice is so important. Whether through formal meditation, self-inquiry, or simply bringing mindfulness to everyday activities, we are constantly cultivating this expanded awareness. A powerful practice is what Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh calls smile meditation. It's simply bringing a slight smile to your face, even and especially in times of difficulty. This simple physical act can create a subtle shift in our consciousness, reminding us of our deeper nature beyond the ego. Another practice is what we might call mindful pausing several times a day. Take a break from whatever you are doing. Breathe deeply and ask yourself, who is breathing? Who is aware of this moment? This simple investigation can bring us back to the space of pure consciousness, beyond ego identifications. As we deepen this practice, we may begin to realize that even the thoughts and emotions that arise are not ours in the conventional sense. They are simply phenomena that arise and pass through consciousness, like clouds in the sky. We don't need to identify with them or be controlled by them. This does not mean we become cold or detached. On the contrary, we become more capable of fully engaging with life without the burden of ego. We can feel joy without clinging to it, sadness without being overwhelmed by it. There is a freedom and a lightness in this way of being. The poet Rumi expressed this idea beautifully. You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in one drop. This understanding frees us from the limitations of the ego, allowing us to experience the vastness and depth of our true nature. But it's important to remember that this journey is not about escaping reality or transcending our humanity. It's about embracing it fully with all its challenges and beauties. Zen invites us to be fully present in life as it is, not as we would like it to be. This means embracing our vulnerability, our imperfection, our mortality. The ego tries to protect us from these difficult truths by building walls of defense and denial. But when we open ourselves to them, we discover a strength and resilience that comes not from the ego, but from our deepest nature. Psychoanalyst Carl Jung spoke about the importance of integrating our shadow, those parts of ourselves that we deny or repress. He argued that only when we embrace all aspects of our psyche, including those we consider negative or undesirable, can we achieve true wholeness. This integration is not an easy process. It requires courage to look honestly at ourselves, to face our fears and vulnerabilities. But it is in this confrontation that we find our true strength. Imagine, for example, that you are afraid of failure. The ego tries to protect you from this fear, leading you to avoid risks or constantly seek approval from others. But what if, instead, you could recognize and embrace that fear, not to be controlled by it, but to see through it? In this process of radical self-acceptance, something surprising happens. Fear loses its power over us, not because it disappears completely, but because our identity is no longer tied to it. We can feel fear and still act with courage, because we know we are more than our fears. This understanding leads us to deeper compassion, not only for others, but also for ourselves. We see that we are all struggling with our own illusions and fears. We are all trying to find our way through the complexity of human existence. The Greek philosopher and mystic Plotinus said, "Knowing oneself is the beginning of wisdom." But this self-knowledge is not just an intellectual exercise. It is a lived experience, a deep dive into the nature of consciousness and reality. As we delve deeper into this investigation, we begin to realize that the distinction between inner and outer is ultimately illusory. Our internal experience and the external world are not two separate things, but different aspects of a single reality. Quantum physicist Werner Heisenberg observed that what we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of inquiry. In other words, we cannot separate the observer from the observed. Our consciousness is intrinsically intertwined with the world we perceive. This understanding has profound implications for how we live our lives. If we are not separate entities fighting a hostile world, but expressions of a universal consciousness interacting with itself, how does this change our approach to life? Perhaps we can begin to see challenges not as obstacles to be overcome, but as opportunities for growth and expansion of consciousness. Perhaps we can approach our relationships not from a place of need or fear, but from an abundance of love and connection. Transpersonal psychologist Ken Wilber talks about the development of consciousness as a process of expanding concentric circles. We begin identified only with our individual ego, then expand to include our family, our community, our nation, all of humanity, and finally all of life and the cosmos. This expansion does not mean denying our individuality, but recognizing that it is a unique expression of something much greater. It is like a wave in the ocean, unique in its shape and movement, but fundamentally not separate from the vastness of the sea. Living from this understanding leads us to a different way of being in the world. We are no longer striving to become someone or reach some future state of fulfillment. Instead, we are discovering and expressing who we truly are, moment by moment. This doesn't mean we don't have goals, or that we don't strive to improve, but the motivation changes. We are no longer driven by fear or the need to prove ourselves. Instead, our actions become a natural expression of our true nature. Zen Master Dogen expressed it beautifully. To become enlightened is to know yourself intimately. This intimacy with oneself is not narcissism or self-absorption. It is a profound recognition of our true nature, which paradoxically leads us to a greater connection with all life. But how can we cultivate this intimacy in our everyday lives? How can we bring this deep understanding to the challenges and joys of everyday life? A powerful practice is what we might call meditation in action. Instead of seeing meditation as something separate from our everyday lives, we can bring this quality of presence and inquiry to everything we do. When you're eating, for example, you can bring your full attention to the experience. Feel the flavor and texture of food. Observe the sensations in your body. Notice the thoughts and emotions that arise. Who is experiencing all this? Where is the I in this experience? Or when you're in a difficult conversation, instead of reacting automatically, you can create a space for observation. Notice how the ego wants to defend itself or attack. See if you can remain open and present, responding from a place of compassion and clarity rather than fear or defensiveness. This constant practice of self-inquiry and presence begins to dissolve the layers of identification we have built throughout our lives. We begin to see through the illusion of the separate self and touch something vaster and deeper. But it is important to remember that this process is not linear. There will be moments of profound clarity and moments of total confusion. There will be days when we feel completely free from the ego and days when we will be completely identified with it. The key is not to judge this experience, but simply observe it with curiosity and compassion. Every moment, whether of clarity or confusion, is an opportunity to deepen our understanding. Philosopher Alan Watts compared this process to trying to smooth the waves on a lake. The more we try to force the water to stay still, the rougher it becomes. The solution is not to fight the waves, but to recognize that we are the water, not just the waves. This metaphor beautifully captures the essence of what Zen and other wisdom traditions teach us about the nature of self and reality. We are not trying to eliminate the ego or achieve some permanent state of enlightenment. We are simply waking up to who we already are, to the vastness and depth of our true nature. In this awakening, we discover a freedom that does not depend on external circumstances. It is not a freedom from something, but a freedom to fully be who we are, to fully engage with life as it presents itself. The poet Kabir said, "I laughed when I heard that the fish in the sea was thirsty." In the same way, we can smile when we realize that we have been seeking outside what has always been inside us. This realization is not the end of the journey, but the true beginning. It is the starting point for a life lived with depth, authenticity, and compassion. A life not limited by the boundaries of the ego, but open to the vastness of our true nature. As we continue on this journey of self-discovery, let us remember the words of Zen Master Shunryu Suzuki: "The beginner's mind has many possibilities, the expert's few." May we keep that beginner's mind always open, always curious, always ready to see reality with new eyes. And so we return to the wisdom of Alan Watts. Life is a dream of which the ego is the cast shadow. May we wake up to the light that casts the shadow, to the luminous vastness of our true nature. It is a journey we take together as unique expressions of a universal consciousness. On this journey, each moment is an opportunity to awaken, each experience an invitation to delve deeper into the truth of who we are. The ego can be a useful tool for navigating the relative world, but it is not our ultimate identity. Our true nature is vast as the sky, deep as the ocean, free as the wind. May we live from this understanding, bringing more light, love, and compassion to the world. May we be beacons of consciousness, illuminating the path not only for ourselves, but for all beings. And always remember, you are not just a drop in the ocean. You are the whole ocean in one drop. Awaken to this truth and let it guide every aspect of your life. The illusion of self can be powerful, but the truth of who we really are is infinitely more powerful. May your journey be one of constant discovery, of continuous awakening. May every step you take be a step towards your true nature, beyond ego, beyond illusions, into the luminous vastness of being